be forgiven for thinking that when it comes to the fat acceptance movement, parts of our society have lost their minds. And I'm not talking about obese people in denial or fat influencers spouting nonsense. I'm talking about those who should know better. The media features obese people in sports magazines, or people being told this is healthy. We're told that they're strong and fit and that silly claims like them being anorexic are actually serious. Doctors avoid the word obese to not offend patients, and medical schools bend science to find metabolically healthy obesity. Speakers at supposedly intellectual TED Talks tell us things like this.
It also speaks to the panic, the literal terror that the fear of fat can evoke. It is this fear that's feeding the diet industry, which is keeping so many of us from making peace with our own bodies.
We have more scientific information at our fingertips than at any point in human history. So how did we get here? That's a fascinating question that I just couldn't get out of my mind. Hey, I'm Ken LaCorte. I do my best to give you a balanced look at these uncomfortable topics. In this space, we have two extremes. First is the fat activist, who don't just demand people treat them kindly, but insist that people can be healthy at any size. Now, to me, that's like claiming the earth is flat, and I just don't see much point in arguing about it. On the other side, there's a cottage industry mocking those ridiculous claims and mocking the people who make them. They get millions of views on YouTube, and, I get it, it's kind of fun, but to me it feels like throwing shit at the village idiot and something we shouldn't really be doing. Instead, I dove into how a fringe movement, often with deadly advice, became mainstream enough to influence the media, medicine, and education, and I want to share that with you. We'll look into the psychological basis of why it's so powerful to overweight people, how the movement began, its explosive growth, and a look at its ugly extremes. In a real sense, this movement started inside the minds and the pain of overweight people who don't want to be that way. Now, I've been overweight, and I can tell you that it messes with your brain. You need to deal with physical cravings that everyone has. We all get hungry and we all need to eat. But for heavy people, it's easy to overdo it. They get a lot of pleasure from food, pleasure that quickly turns into guilt and self-loathing. It can be an ugly cycle that hurts your self-esteem, something that more food can make you temporarily forget. It's also a failure that's very public, in a way that other bad habits aren't. You can procrastinate or play too many video games, and few people will ever notice. But being overweight is something that you and everyone in your life sees every day. You can layer on top of that the fact that they're often just treated worse than thin people. Ask any friend who's been both. But to be told by people that you're fine as you are, that's a seductive idea. It goes even deeper than losing weight because we're also social animals, hardwired to seek acceptance. The body positivity movement offers that in spades. It's not just saying you're okay, it's saying you're also part of a community, a movement. Studies show that social rejection activates the same area of the brain as physical pain. So when society rejects you for your size and then a movement comes along saying, we accept you, we love you, that's like a balm for your brain. In America, 42% of people here are considered obese. And that's on top of an additional 30% who are considered overweight. That's a lot of people looking for comfort. As a movement, like a lot of others in the United States, the fat activists got more organized in the late 60s. In 1967, 500 people gathered in New York Central Park for a fat-in, organized by an overweight radio announcer. They ate ice cream, they waved protest signs, and burned diet books and photos of Twiggy, who was a popular super thin model. Organizations were formed, including the more militant fat underground of the 1970s.
We demand good health care. I hate it when I go to doctors and they blame all my symptoms on my fat.
Those groups really didn't make too many waves, and it wasn't until about another 30 years, around 2010, when things started to catch fire again. That was when the anti-bullying campaigns were sweeping the nation. A 2010 study found that obese kids were 65% more likely to be bullied than classmates of normal weight. Suddenly, there were hard numbers behind the harsh treatment that fat kids face, and fat acceptance groups pounced. They framed weight stigma as a form of bullying that was destroying innocent children. Child advocacy toolkits tried to shift the focus from the war on childhood obesity to a health-centered focus embracing children of all sizes. They wanted to stop people from focusing on weight for the more nebulous idea of health. By painting fat kids as victims of persecution, fat activists successfully tapped into the culture at the time. People recognized bullying as a serious issue, and their hearts went out to tormented kids. Schools implemented zero-tolerance anti-bullying policies, and the argument that fat people were an oppressed class struck a chord. But the fat acceptance movement became about much more than protecting kids on the playground. Activists argued that the real threat to fat people's health wasn't their weight, but the discrimination they experienced. Essentially, they argued that their stress was even more unhealthy than their weight. It spawned the health at every size movement that tries to overturn the notion that thinness equals health. There are cards patients can hand their doctors, asking that they not be weighed unless it's really medically necessary. Other websites have doctor's office survival kits and video workshops on dealing with fat phobia at the doctor's office. These practitioners say they use a weight-neutral approach, but that approach isn't neutral at all. Not mentioning a serious factor in a patient's health is kind of a big deal. But besides the nation's anti-bullying sentiment around that time, the decade from 2010 to 2020 coincided with an explosion of social media. Instagram came online, and then TikTok a few years later. Algorithms help build movements because once you're in, they'll fill your feed with like-minded content. They also find and define large audiences. The body-positive hashtags amassed millions of posts and billions of views. That means fame, and where there's fame, dollar signs follow, and that creates explosive growth. Celebrities and influencers jumped on the bandwagon, amplifying the message to millions. Lizzo was the most prominent, with her 12 million Instagram followers. She became one of the movement's biggest stars. Influencer Tess Holliday, with over 2 million Instagram followers, isn't just posting selfies. She's selling a lifestyle. Her book, The Not-So-Subtle Art of Being a Fat Girl, became an instant bestseller in 2017, and hundreds of other influencers came online as well.
For my wild exercise, I choose this brownie. Such a workout.
Don't assume that weight loss is going to benefit your health in any way, because there's no evidence to support that.
Being forced to lose weight for medical reasons is not body positive.
If you are losing weight because you want to feel better, be in less pain, be healthier, all of these things, that's fatphobic.
They earned through the social media platforms themselves, and some raked in nice sponsorship deals as well. Companies like Lane Bryant and Torrid pay big bucks for sponsoring posts promoting fat acceptance. And then there's the mainstream media. Sometimes they define culture, but they always cater to it. I showed you one of Cosmopolitan's issues where they put large models on the cover. Some people praise them for being inclusive, while others accuse them of promoting obesity. But what Cosmo cared about was the buzz. That issue sparked more online engagement than they'd seen in years. Controversy sells. I can pretty much guarantee you that the editors of Sports Illustrated know that these women appeal to a very small minority of their readers. But it got them buzz too, as well as brownie points for being nice, inclusive people. Other fashion and media outlets jumped in as well. Even the fitness industry is cashing in with fat yoga classes popping up. And there's a fat acceptance wellness industry with online babe camps to help you break up with the diet culture. Here's the bottom line. Fat acceptance has a big audience, and it sells. Books, classes, clothes, medical equipment. It's no longer just a movement, it's an industry. And that industry has a vested interest in keeping you feel good about your body, no matter what size it is. But it became more than just about feeling good and eating what you want. It has a nasty bite as well, and still does. So as fat acceptance grew in the midst of the anti-bullying movement, it tied itself to the concept of civil rights. It's a clever move, psychologically speaking. By framing fatness as an identity, like race or gender, it triggers our instinct to fight against discrimination. Fat phobia became a phrase, just like homophobia and transphobia. The concept of fat pride was modeled off of gay pride and black pride as well. Words like discrimination and oppression became part of the narrative. And, perhaps not surprisingly, being fat phobic was tied directly to racism. The Scientific American, for instance, a journal that gets more political by the year, tells us that prescribing weight loss to black women ignores barriers to their health. Okay. Also unsurprisingly, professors backed up this view as well. Like this one, who wrote a book claiming that the fetish for thinness stemmed from the slave trade and the spread of Protestantism. Now, I read just enough of it to know that it was essentially word salad and not the good kind. But in the era of cancel culture, the fear of being labeled a fat shamer is no joke. Celebrity fitness trainer Jillian Michaels got slammed for questioning why people were celebrating Lizzo's body. Bill Maher, Tyra Banks, Jordan Peterson, Kelly Osbourne, Rihanna, they were all attacked for what were mild criticisms or often warnings not to celebrate obesity. Even when Adele lost some weight, she was accused of betraying the body-positive movement. Lizzo as well. But it got much more serious when health institutions started softening their language and their medical approach to avoid being attacked. This fear of being labeled fat-phobic has led to some truly baffling situations. In 2019, the UK charity Cancer Research ran a campaign correctly pointing out that obesity is the second biggest preventable cause of cancer after smoking. They were blasted by activists and other academics for fat shaming because they said it gave the impression to obese people that their cancer was their fault. Now, let that sink in. A cancer charity was attacked for trying to prevent cancer. Universities are now offering fat studies courses to interrogate fatness and fat phobia. Some hospitals are removing scales from waiting rooms and only weigh patients who specifically request it. Why? To avoid triggering eating disorders or making patients feel uncomfortable. And some doctors feel pressure to avoid discussing weight with obese and overweight patients altogether. A 2018 study found that only 40% of UK doctors would bring up the topic of weight loss with obese patients. That's not just political correctness. That's medical negligence. Cardiologist Dr. Asim Malhotra got hit for speaking out about the link between obesity and severe COVID-19 outcomes. He again was accused of fat shaming despite presenting peer-reviewed medical evidence. That's when a movement has gone too far, with positivity turning into actually killing people. And these deaths aren't just theoretical. It's directly hitting the fat influencer world. Brittany Sauer died at age 28. Taylor Lejeune, he was only 33 and died the same month. Kat Paz, New England fat studies professor, died at age 42. And Jamie Lopez, the 500-pound star of Supersize Salon, died at age 37. Now, it's just a hunch, but I suspect that the extremes of this movement have probably reached their peak, and the early deaths of obese people will be part of it. You rarely see really obese people in their 70s and beyond because most of them are already dead. At a certain point, reality destroys bad ideas. It reminds me a little of the drug culture, which really took off in the 60s, but was soon killing off the musical icons like Jimi Hendrix, Janis Joplin, and Jim Morrison. In the 70s, when I grew up, every time you turned around, another young celebrity was dead from drugs. And so by the 80s, the anti-drug backlash, and sponsored by Nancy Reagan and the whole Just Say No campaign, it got under full swing and it turned that around. The longer you live and pay attention, the easier you'll see these pendulums of social change go back and forth. For instance, when I was young, the concept of recycling wasn't a thing at all. Now, at least in my neighborhood, we don't throw anything away without it going into one of the proper many bins. But is that because it's really helpful, or could it actually be more about making us feel good? On YouTube, I started seeing videos that said recycling, especially plastic recycling, was essentially a scam. Well, you should never really trust a YouTuber. So I started researching that, and quite frankly, it made me a little sad. It's a pretty interesting story, and you may want to check it out. Hey, as always, thank you for watching. Subscribe to see more, and I hope you come back again.